friends, welcome back to another episode of Storytime with Chantastic, where we talk about the tools and discipline of modern UI development. Today, I have an awesome friend here for you to meet, Adam Fratino, who does design systems work at Peloton. Adam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Sun's out. I'm on vacation. I'm down in Florida. Things are fantastic.
Thank you so much for sharing your vacation with us. It's kind of nice.
I panicked before this and I shaved. I was like, oh my God, I look terrible. Like,
Got that vacation energy going on. I love it. I think the first one of these I did, I had like a beanie and like a hoodie on or something like that. So super
yeah,
casual, super casual. This is for us, it's for us.
of course.
Hey, so one of the things that really drew me to you and wanting to have this conversation is kind of this notion of like falling into design systems work, and I think it's something that we don't really talk about, and you and I have like an immediate kinship over this feeling of like I didn't set out to do this kind of work, like it wasn't in my job description, but it was handed to me and it just kind of happened. And I love that because I think we always talk about it from this like kind of like more lofty idea of like design systems, like in a spotlight like shines down on us as design system authors. So I'm curious to kick it all off. How did you get into this field of design systems and component libraries?
I'm very happy with where I am right now, first of all. And, it's something that I always was kind of attracted to in separate portions of my life. I grew up very artistic, but I also loved being in the computer lab. I loved writing code back with HTML4. It was always a hobby of mine, it was like making little projects. Um, I honestly never even thought it was going to be a job of mine. I went to design school. I studied design very quickly, studying graphic design, realized that it was a little too opinionated for me. I liked the engineering world a little bit more. So I couldn't drop out of college a second time. So I was like, let me see, let me figure out how I can pair this design degree with my passion for writing code. And that started out working at ad agencies, Barbarian Group and Roken here in New York City. And it just kind of elevated from there. I was kind of like attached to these branding projects that I had worked on in the past, and having to give them away afterwards was kind of like, no, I want to keep working on it. Almost like back to the design mentality where, something's never finished. So I found this opportunity at Peloton. I started out as a UI engineer there, and working on front end stuff like I was doing previously, and it just kind of evolved from there. The need to kind of build a tool set for our engineers. We had a lot of people working on a lot of things, and it just became cumbersome to reinvent the wheel over and over and over again. So, some people above me, you know, thought this would be a good idea, and here we are.
Yeah, and I'm sure you have a lot of experience now going from kind of like startup to public, which I'd love to talk about that experience as well. But more on that feeling of kind of being attached to something. Um, that really like spoke to me. The idea of agency work, you're kind of like getting it up, like scaffolding it up really fast and like handing it off. And I know that for some people that's really exciting, right? Like the idea of like never touching something again. But there is this kind of like artistic like bent or something that seems to be in a lot of design systems workers, I guess, or laborers that I meet. And it feels like this kind of art over time, like this craft over time, something that you um, are steadily working on producing new versions of, but you know that it's never quite done, and you're always kind of setting out to improve it. um, do you feel like that's one of the core like personality like traits maybe of someone who does this type of work?
Yeah, I mean, myself, the people I work with, I notice that in all of them, there's a meticulousness, for the lack of better words. There's a respect in not skipping steps. My partner, Dan Hahn. at Peloton has been with me on this team since the beginning, and we come from similar backgrounds. He comes from, agency type backgrounds too, I believe, or working on client stuff or internal stuff. And you know, when you've been doing something like this long enough, you realize that it's rare to get away with skipping steps. Usually,
Yeah.
you save an hour here, it costs you 5 hours down the line. Um, so the thoroughness and the pace that goes into something like a design system, and recognizing that we just work in a fluid environment. Just engineering at large is never, it's never the same one year to the next, so a button is never going to be the same one year to the next. The needs of what a button can do are always going to change, and you have to be light on your feet and willing to respect that, and hopefully learn to love it.
Yeah, there's a lot outside of your control. I'm curious, what did things look like when you started doing design system work at Peloton? Like, what was in place? What needed to be that like next step? And kind of like what were you hoping to eventually get to in those early days?
A design audit was that was easily the first step, and kind of consolidating and collecting the things that we did the most often across our e-com sites. That was step one. What are we doing the most often, and how can we, you know, create a tool set or a UI kit to save other engineers the time of having to do that? Again, we touched on how fast Peloton has grown. When I started, it was, we were still pre-IPO, and I saw very, very big growth. I was you know, I hit the ground running, and it was fun. You learn things very fast that way, and thankfully, I was surrounded by a lot of talent, a lot of very talented engineers. I just kind of kept my mouth shut, tried to learn from all of them. What do you guys need? What makes your job easier? And that's really what it turns into is start from the most common things that people don't want to do or getting tripped up with. Someone that's working on a lot of system stuff or back of the front end stuff is not going to want to, rewrite a layout over and over again every time they get a new design. So let's try and create something that makes that easier for them. I don't mind being the point of contact for that because I love that stuff. And let's try and create a set of tools that make it easier for these people to do the things that they love to do. Because surprisingly, a lot of people don't like to recreate UI components over and over again.
A marvel, right? It's hard to understand why people wouldn't want to recreate
I
something.
don't get it. I don't get it.
um, as you're doing that auditing work, and doing these interviews with people to, casual or formal or whatever, just kind of asking people what it is that they don't like, what they'd like to see abstracted and whatnot. Um, how did you start like cataloging that and triaging that into what would eventually be a design system? Like, how do you start that ball rolling when you don't have a lot of things in place?
It starts with design, and the things that we do on the engineering side in the design system are obviously extremely important. But it starts with design. Design has the vision, design ultimately steers the ship, especially in the beginning stages. So listening to design and constantly, getting in the same room as the designers that you're eventually, you know, not building for, but building from. They're the ones that are your inspiration at the end of the day. And they're the ones who are ultimately gonna, nitpick the finer things. An engineer is gonna look at a button way differently than a designer is gonna look at a button, and they're gonna look at the entirety of a web app a lot differently than an engineer does. Engineers tend to be laser focused sometimes and compartmentalized in what they're working on, and I think that's a very good thing. Designers, more often than not are big picture people, you know, and then it's easier for them to draw parallels sometimes in the visual side of what we
Yeah.
do. So you start just by listening to the designers, you know, just like I said, we had a lot of talented engineers when I came in. Our design team was just, you know, what they did with the time that they were given and how fast things were working was amazing, you know, and then to pivot to propping up a design system and giving us enough to work on in the beginning stages of what we were doing was amazing. You know, we got in the room with design often, we listened to design often, and they just kind of put things in motion right away.
That's interesting. So you mentioned like you have kind of like one hand in design and then you have one hand in engineering, and you're kind of like this interpret like you're kind of interpreting the messaging like from one department to the other. Do you see design systems as being a function of one side or the other, or is it this like totally unique thing that kind of like stands in the gap between the two?
No, it's it serves a purpose for one side, it serves a different purpose for the other side. It's not to get too crazy about it, but it's like it's almost like a brain, you know, and that our two sides of our brain do different things and they're both equally important, you know, and sometimes you leverage one side more than the other, but you have a creative side, you have a mechanical side, and not necessarily always finding a balance, but being conscious of each side and being respectful of each side and addressing those concerns as they come along is very important, you know. It's never going to be one thing. It's always going to be changing, and you know, it's a system for design as much as it is a system for engineers, and just being in tune and being able to speak the languages, and most importantly, listen to the languages from both sides and adapt from that is a recipe for success, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's funny. I talked with Ryan Behan at Shopify in the second one of these, and he had kind of like a funny analogy where it was like talking about songwriting and like how weird it would be if you're actually writing, you're collaborating in like totally different languages, totally different forms of actually communicating with each other, and it feels like design systems work and working on component libraries really sits in this interesting space of being an interpreter, like really like going out and getting all of the information and like coming up with some like common language between the two, which is not like obvious. I don't think like there's not a lot of obvious options like when you want to try to communicate something to like this side of the way that people think, and then also like this side of the way that people think. um what have been some of the biggest challenges as you've kind of started that work, as you've started to kind of get some feedback where maybe one side says, hey, like this would make a lot more sense if it was just like this, right? Like just language, right? If you just did it this way, it would make a lot more sense. But like both, you have like pretty competing ideas on like what just to do. I'm curious, how do you kind of justify those and like work through some of those challenges?
First and foremost, Ryan's talk was amazing. I love the music parallels too, and Polaris over at Shopify, their design system was a huge inspiration for us. So I just want to get that out of the way. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to who to please, who to pay attention to, who to draw inspiration from, and ultimately like how to balance that, um, it's a big part of it is listening, and understanding what people are asking for, and it's also the language that you use to speak with them. You know, a designer may not necessarily know what goes into a button. You know, I keep using a button as an example because there's surprisingly a lot of things that go into it. It is, you know, typography is obviously there's some engineering that goes into the properties and stuff, but it's just there and it's on the page. The button is interactive. It does a lot of things, you know, and it also has to look good. So educating either side, you know. One thing that I've been fortunate enough to kind of build over time in my toolkit is, you know, being capable of speaking to a designer in a language that they can understand as an engineer, because I went through design school. I have that graphic design background, and then speaking to an engineer, almost like like as they would want to be spoken to, but coming from a designer's perspective, and when people don't work together and they're kind of laser focused on what they're doing, and this goes beyond design systems, people are always kind of first and foremost like focused on what's right in front of them. This is most important. And when you're juggling not just different people, but different mediums, different disciplines, a designer thinks that what they're doing is the most important thing. An engineer thinks that what they're doing is the most important thing. The truth is that neither of them are wrong. They're both doing the most important thing for what they're doing, and finding that collaboration and finding that kind of that middle ground between them is not difficult. And it's a design system team. Sometimes it's their responsibility to almost kind of be like the referee or the translator in a scenario like
Mm,
this. You can say, hey, I understand you want it this way, but it's going to cause it's going to make this code a little bit more brittle. It's going to cause a harder developer experience. So one thing that was very important to us was, some of our designers didn't understand what props were in a React sense, and they were asking for all of these things, and we want the button to do this, we want this, layout component to do all this. And I'm like, it took me a while to educate them on what props are, and once you do that, you break it down in a design language, and you say, these are just options. These are like settings in a menu, and you get to pick from them, like brush types. Like you have 100 brush types, that would be a brush prop with 100 options, and they're like, oh, I get it now, so it it makes it easier for them to communicate with us. It makes them easier to communicate directly with engineers that are consuming our design system, which ultimately is what we want. I don't ever want to get in the middle or be the middleman of design and the consumers of our design system. I want it to be easy for one person on the design team or the design team itself to give the engineers exactly what they need. That's our ultimate goal. We want Dan, my teammate, said it very well. I don't have the notes in front of me, but like we want to give the consumers of what we do the power to do their job without, the requirement of us, or without them having to do our job for us. We eventually want to get out of the way and let
mm.
them do their thing. So facilitating that communication, kind of being the hand holder, and it's like setting up a blind date, like eventually you just got to get out of the way and see what happens.
I like that. I like that metaphor. So something that is interesting to me is that as I'm hearing all of this, I'm hearing about all of the communication that has to happen and the collaboration that needs to happen. And the thing that the value that keeps ballooning up in my head is just time. Like it seems like the work of design systems happens a lot in the space of like time. And I'm curious, like how you're nodding your head fairly aggressively. So I'm curious, like how do you experience that pressure? Because that's a very distinct pressure from being both on like the design or the engineering side. At least I've experienced it this way, right? Where it's like where there was maybe a clear outcome, and then as long as I performed that, then it just kind of like moved further along the org chart until it finally got released. Um, it feels to me like so much of this is collaboration and communication that the time piece of that is maybe a little bit variable. Um, what's your experience been with
Not enough time in the day to get everything that we want to get done.
that?
Now, we and again, this is coming from the perspective of a project that is still less than 2 years old. We're still an infant when it comes to what we're doing compared to some of the heavy hitters out there. But Yeah, it's if I could say one thing in regards to time, that is just, obviously we want to, not waste time, but we can't skip steps. You can't expect to jump right into something without setting the groundwork and the foundation of what you're doing.
Hmm.
And that's something that we kind of, I don't want to say suffered from, because I think we did a very good job of propping up this project. But we hit the ground running. We came in very hot with our component building, with our platform set up, and there were some things that we had to go back and, you know, reconfigure or spend some more time on. But the advice to anybody else that's setting something up from the ground up is to not skip steps. The time will fall into place. This is going back to what we were speaking about earlier, and this is the project that is never done. You know, there's an infinite amount of time you could spend on something like this because it's just constantly changing. And to know that from the outset, that it's not a race, it's not a sprint to get I know we're used to hearing the term sprint all the time. I brought it up in the beginning of this project. I didn't want to be I didn't want to be stuck on deadlines. I didn't want to be constantly having to, you know, deal with those conversations. You be respectful of design's time, you be respectful of development's time. If some person needs your time, you set it up for them. And you just, more than anything else, you be there for people, because time isn't, we have 100% of our time on the clock to work on this. Not everybody else does. So, just
Yeah.
like we have, people respect us and give us the time to work on stuff, when they ask when's the next release coming out, why isn't this release out? Can I fit this into the release? We say, give us time and you will get it, because the last thing we want to do is rush a release, ship a bug, and then have to re-release, because that takes time.
Yeah.
So being deliberate in those steps, I would say, you know, don't create too much of a runway for yourself and what you plan to work on. Keep it loose. Be ready to switch things up if that's what your team needs to do. But just kind of always focus on being efficient, and most importantly, don't waste the time of your engineers, of your designers. Be respectful of their time too, because at the end of the day, it's a collaborative project, and it's more collaborative than a lot of the other things that we do, because it's on that cusp of design and engineering where it's cross medium, which we don't always
Mhm.
see in engineering. There's a lot of engineering uh, uh, jobs out there that are just pure engineering. You don't hear that noise, and that's a good thing sometimes. But we also, some of us need to be on that border, where we're working not just with other engineers but other employees, and be efficient when you can, but don't rush things. I think that's been our recipe so far, and it's done us well.
I love that. I love that. Now, one of the challenges that I've always had working in this space is kind of what you touched on just then is that people are always asking for a feature or kind of like a release of some features that they know are coming. And I'm curious, how do you balance I guess the challenge of providing enough in the design system or component library to help people and have them depend on you for that piece of it, but then also give them the tools to, I guess, solve their own problem until that next release comes or until that feature is kind of like
Right.
baked into the library. Do you have strategies for that?
Start small, stay small. The KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. I think that, one of the things that I would take back from year one of what we did was that we really tried to please everyone. Uh, and it got to a point where we were pleasing no one. Everyone was almost satisfied, so we pulled back a lot. We um we went directly from, building out things on a very atomic level to components to building modules. And what we realized was that, going back to kind of the theme of our conversation, is that things are always changing. And if a module is a collection of components, you know, and someone needs to change a module, now all of a sudden we need to go into our design system, we need to update that, and we need to cut another release so that they can have that. So one thing we kind of realized over time to kind of satisfy different engineers from different teams who all kind of want different things is to again find the commonality in what they want, find what they're asking for, see if there's any overlap, and start from there. And it's hard sometimes to tell people no, but that is another very effective thing. And at a certain point in your project, people will ask you for things, and the better you get at defining what you are as a design system, the easier it is to tell people no. And we didn't really have that defined
Hmm.
in the first year or so of what we were doing. We were looking for our own identity, and we were looking for outlets to help us figure that out. Design engineers, different engineering teams were coming to us asking for certain things, and we knew that we were going to trip up along the way, but we wanted to because that was the only way we would figure out eventually what worked for us.
Yeah.
So, if I could give any advice to that side of things, it's, keep it simple. Start with the small stuff. Stay with the small stuff, and when people start coming to you and asking you for all these different things, ask them, which designer is this coming from? Which design team is this coming from? Where else is this feature going to be used? Because if it's a singular feature, maybe it's best that you do it yourself. Because if we bake it into our design system, which, we have our own release cadence, now all of a sudden you may be dependent on us, and we don't want that. We
Yep.
want to give you the tools that you need to do what you do more efficiently. And if you're constantly coming to us and asking us to fix something, we're not giving you those tools. We're just doing it for you. So creating a foundation where people can create their own modules, share them with each other. One thing we're doing now is instead of distributing modules for imports, we're creating collections. We're creating these modules within Storybook so that people can reference them. They have code recipes, they have these snippets to just drop wherever they need them to, and these teams can now share them with each other. And now you're creating a more collaborative environment between two development teams, which in my opinion is more time efficient and more dry long term uh, across our actual front end application.
That's really interesting. The notion of publishing recipes in Storybook. I really like that idea. And it kind of ties to this popular thing that we're seeing in the industry right now with Tailwind UI, um, which is really fascinating because like it's really like a collection of recipes, right? Like if you have a Tailwind UI license, you go to Tailwind UI, you'll pull all the markup and then use that. But then it's easily adaptable as you need to change it over time because like you used a recipe, you didn't use like a component. And so that's like really fascinating, the idea of doing recipes over like components where you don't have like absolute certainty that that's the component, that's the way it's going to
Hey,
be
if
for
there's
forever.
one thing that has never changed in our industry since the beginning, it's copy and pasting someone else's code. That is the way how we write our code may change, but that will be forever. So giving people the option to do that, um, with the added benefit of us being there to talk with them. We're very big on pairing. I don't ever want to set somebody out with a bunch of components or tools that they don't know how to use. And as we're building this up, we um, we almost self-document in a lot of the things that we do. So there's going to be some questions that come along, and being available to teams to pair, they come to us and they say, "Oh, how do we build this?" We say, "Oh, here's how we would build it. Let's pair on getting it in your environment, and you know,
Mm.
let's go through line by line and kind of build this together so that you understand what's happening under the hood and you understand why we would build it this way based on, our experiences, what we've built for ourselves so far." It's just in the past couple of years been so much easier, and it's we work, especially at Peloton, at places I worked at in the past. Engineers are just so smart most of the time, and you just have to give them the benefit of the doubt. You don't ever want to spoon feed anyone. You just say, more or less they know exactly what they're doing, and if they don't, they'll figure it out. So to give someone an entire full-fledged module where everything is obscured under the hood, like, it's just not a good feeling to just import hero, you know. Import, there's so many things that are going to change from a design perspective. They're going to want to change so many things that, like, why don't we give you the tools to build that hero on your own side? You can import it from wherever you want in your mono, like, and we can be there for you if you ever have any questions on how we would do things. And at the very least, we can go in and watch you code. We can do it for you. We can review your code, and just creating a collaborative space where we're not doing things for you. We're just giving you the tools to do things faster.
Yeah. As you're saying this, like I'm thinking about how you're exchanging one type of process for another, right? Like you're exchanging this process of like developing a component that then like kind of avoids the communication piece. But now you're talking about building kind of a decomposed set of components that actually requires some like like personal interdependence, right? Like it requires a level of like you bridging that gap, saying this is the recipe for this thing, and if you need to adapt it, like here are some strategies for adapting it and changing it over time that don't require this, you know, that you ask us and then we produce a new release. It's a very cool thing, and I feel like something that as we get more and like deeper and deeper into design systems as a discipline, I feel like that gets more and more revealed. Like this is a collaborative thing. It's almost like organizational health, right? Like there's like this organizational therapy piece to
Oh
it.
my God.
That's
Therapy has its ups and downs just like this does. Extreme highs and extreme lows for sure.
yeah, there's definitely a balance there, right? And so I'm curious, like as you scale the team, like how do you see that the cost versus reward on that effort? Because I think that's more like long-term thinking, right? Like, if we have healthy relationships, if we have healthy communication and we have healthy patterns, we will move faster together. The short-term thinking is I built this thing, let's put it in the component library.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was our.
So like as you think about those benefits, as you try to like communicate those to the team, and kind of like develop these actual human processes around your design system, like do you do you have a place where you like actually like communicate that, like communicate these values, like talk about this process as being collaborative across teams and like people being able to and expected to like speak into them? um how do you communicate that to the other teams involved in this larger process?
Uh, it's been very unique for us because this project started post-COVID, so we've only ever been remote on this. And I'm extremely excited to see how this project will evolve when we're back in the office, if we're ever back in the office. But from our perspective, or I guess from our history, it's just centralizing channels, being overly transparent in our annoying at here sometimes, just at least at the very beginning to make people aware that we exist, you know, getting the channels out there, over communicating what our intent is, what our goals are, what our calendar looks like. One of the first things that I was really passionate about on this project was leaving our monorepo. Uh,
Interesting.
I had come from working in Armano on one of the packages there, and I love it. I just going back to our time conversation, I thought that creating a dedicated space for this would, one, speed up our workflow a lot, because we'd be able to create a testing suite dedicated to us. Storybook and that setup was now our space, and that was very important to me because, you know, there's a certain level of presentation and selling that goes into something like this. Someone who's been recreating layout components for their entire career may not all of a sudden want to just import a layout component or a grid component. They may say, "Well, I've been doing it my way forever, so why should I stop?" So it's our job as a design system team to educate people and to really sell it to them and say, "This is why, you would benefit from working with us." And the communication side of things is just having presentations on almost every major component that we had in the beginning when they were still very new, reaching out to teams proactively and saying, "Hey, we noticed that you're using a lot of components in this portion of the site that we've recreated in design system. Let's pair together to see if we can refactor that to use the design system." So getting people involved through collaboration was a big part. I'm very big on face to face or video collaborations, but it can be anywhere. It can be me speaking to many people. It can be me speaking to one person. It can be me listening to many people and just kind of documenting those needs and then just kind of going from there. But it's always an uphill battle to project what you're working on, and to get people to pay attention to you. And I honestly thought that a new repository and a fresh space for people to write fresh issues that don't get lost in a monorepo's worth of issues, seeing every release and every commit kind of there and dedicated to what we were doing, having a storybook that was very cohesive and dedicated to the people that were using it, was very important to us. We didn't want to half-ass anything. And we were probably a little annoying in the first year reaching out to certain teams. But thankfully I had built relationships with a lot of engineers that were on different teams from my previous work at Peloton. And I felt very comfortable reaching out to them. And most importantly, they felt comfortable reaching out to me. So it kind of fell into place naturally. And it was a little nerve-wracking in the beginning. It's nervous to say, "Hey, I built this. You should use it," because what if they say no? What if they do use it and it sucks? Like, there's so many things that could go wrong. But if you can power through those nerves and just get it into people's hands, you know, you'll figure it out together. And more often than not, people are going to be excited about it. So now I would say the majority of our conversations about the next steps of design system are people reaching out to us. We're finally at a point where we have teams that we didn't even know they knew about our design system are using it and coming to us with feature requests or questions. And that's so exciting for us. And it really just kind of, at a certain point, if you push it hard enough into so many different spaces, it'll cultivate naturally. And if you build something that people really enjoy using, they're going to want to talk about it.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I really love that the way that you have taken this opportunity to foster trust with other teams, because as you're talking, that's something that really stands out to me. Like, this isn't, you've had to learn some difficult lessons about like kind of being comfortable selling this thing, but really you're operating in this economy of trust. You're pairing a lot with other teams, making sure that they understand the tools and feel comfortable using the tools, and then through that experience, it seems like that trust kind of filters out to other people as you continue to build together. I think we're at kind of the end of our time, but I just wanted to ask, is there anything that I haven't asked about that you would like to share before we wrap up?
I don't know, nothing I can think of. I just want to say thanks to everybody at Peloton, uh, that I've worked with that may be watching this. I want to say thanks to you for allowing me to do this. I really, really appreciate it, and I'm excited to see what we do in the next couple of years. This has been I've learned a lot of new things in the past couple of years, just but being new to design systems and just being new to all this stuff, and I've fallen in love with it. So if there's anybody that's watching this that is just learning about what a design system is, I would encourage them to dig in because it's been a blast.
I love it. That's great. That's great. A great place to end. So yeah, thanks so much for watching another one of these. Adam's been amazing. So if you like Adam, hit like and subscribe to our channel for future videos and interviews like this. Thank you so much for your time, for hanging out with us today, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye.